Engine Adventures Hero. This story is about Hero, an old engine who was lost for many years. We wanted to help fix Hero so he wouldn't be sent for scrap, but we had to keep him a secret. Spencer was visiting Sodor for the summer. He was helping to build a holiday home for the Duke and Duchess of Boxford. "Out of my way, slow coach!" he would shout. "I'm the fastest, strongest engine around." One day, Spencer and Thomas had a contest to see who was strongest. "Whoever pulls his heavy load the furthest wins," said Spencer. Thomas and Spencer were ready to race. "Peep, peep!" whistled Edward, and they were off. Spencer steamed ahead, but Thomas soon ran into trouble. "My brakes have broken! I'm going too fast!" Thomas gasped. He whooshed down a steep hill onto a rickety old track. Crashing through bushes, Thomas finally came to a stop. When he opened his eyes, Thomas was surprised. There stood an engine, looking rusty and broken. "My name is Hero," said the old engine. He told Thomas that he had come from far away. "I was the strongest engine there," said Hero. "They called me the Master of the Railway." Thomas promised to fix Hero and make him as good as new. Thomas was so excited that he forgot all about Spencer. He puffed slowly to the steamworks so Victor could mend his brakes. When he got there, Thomas spotted a wagon with an old boiler. "That's just scrap," Victor told Thomas. "If we mended it, Hero could have it," thought Thomas. Later, Thomas told Percy all about his new friend. Percy promised to keep Hero a secret. If the Fat Controller finds out, he might send Hero for scrap, Thomas worried. So Thomas and Percy made a plan. Percy would do Thomas's jobs while Thomas tried to fix Hero. Nosy Spencer wondered what they were up to. When Thomas got home, he was in trouble. Percy had burst the safety valve pulling Thomas's train. The Fat Controller was cross. "Why was Percy pulling your carriages?" he asked in a stern voice. "Now the mail is late." Thomas felt terrible. He promised to help Percy with the mail train the next morning. Thomas knew he needed his friends' help, so he told them all about Hero. When Hero broke down, his crew couldn't find the parts to fix him, Thomas explained. Hero was put in a siding and everyone forgot about him. Gordon gasped and James jumped. All the engines wanted to help Hero. The next few days on Sodor were busy. Gordon, James and Henry carried parts to Hero, while Thomas puffed up and down his branch line. After work, Thomas and Percy went to see Hero. The big engine was a colourful patchwork of parts. Hero's firebox fizzled and flared. "I feel better already," he smiled. Suddenly, there came a loud "Poop, poop!" Spencer had seen Hero. "What is that heap of scrap?" Spencer gasped. "Wait until I tell the Fat Controller." Spencer wheeled away, with Thomas chasing after. Thomas had to tell the Fat Controller about Hero before Spencer did. Suddenly, the old track gave way under Spencer. The big engine was stuck. Thomas puffed on to Knapford, his wheels wobbling. When he arrived, he told the Fat Controller everything. All about Hero and how Spencer had got stuck. "Hero was the master of the railway. I would never scrap him, the Fat Controller said kindly. He must have been left there by accident. You must take Hero to the steamworks straight away, Thomas. Soon, Hero was ready for action. His new boiler gleamed and his black paint shone. The Fat Controller asked Hero to rescue Spencer. I'm sorry I was rude, said Spencer. Hero smiled. He felt stronger than ever. With a mighty heave, he pulled Spencer back on track. Well done, Hero, peeped Thomas, the master of the railway. Engine Adventures, Gordon. This story is about Gordon the Big Engine, Sodor's fastest engine. Gordon always thinks he knows best, but when things go wrong, he doesn't feel quite so grand. Big Blue Gordon loved showing off and telling the other engines what to do. Watch me rush past with the express this afternoon, he said to Edward. It will be such a splendid sight. And please don't bump your trucks, Gordon went on. Really useful engines never do that. Then Gordon steamed away. Edward didn't listen to Gordon. He was having too much fun bumping his train of trucks. Biff! Ouch! Cried the trucks. What's going on? Just then, Edward heard a long whistle. Boop! It was Gordon, looking cross. He wasn't pulling the shiny express coaches. Dirty coal trucks, moaned Gordon. Oh, the indignity! Gordon rumbled by, with the trucks click-clacking behind. Edward smiled. Then there was trouble. A porter came and spoke to Edward's driver. Gordon can't get up the hill. We need Edward's help, he said. Halfway up the hill, Edward found that Gordon had stopped. These silly trucks won't go, groaned Gordon. Edward rolled up behind Gordon's brake van. You'll be no use, huffed Gordon. Wait and see, Edward replied. The guard blew his whistle. Gordon pulled and Edward pushed. I can't do it! I can't do it! Gordon wheezed. Yes, you can! Yes, you can! Edward called. Edward pushed and puffed with all his strength until Gordon reached the top of the hill. I've done it! Smiled Gordon. The big engine steamed on to the next station without stopping to say thank you to Edward. The Fat Controller didn't forget to thank Edward. The next day, Edward was given a shiny new coat of blue paint with red stripes. Gordon hadn't learnt his lesson. He still thought he was better than the other engines. Henry, you whistle too much, said Gordon one night. Really useful engines never whistle loudly, not on the Fat Controller's railway. Henry felt sad. I like your whistling, Henry, whispered Percy. The next day, Henry and Edward suddenly heard an engine's whistle, getting louder and louder. It sounds like Gordon, gasped Henry. But it can't be. It was Gordon. His safety valve wouldn't close, and he was whistling fit to burst. He raced through the station at a tremendous speed. Henry smiled. Really useful engines never whistle loudly, he said. Boop! What a terrible sound! The passengers and crew covered their ears as Gordon screeched along. So did the Fat Controller. Take him away! The Fat Controller boomed. And stop that noise! Still whistling, Gordon wheeled away. Gordon whistled as he crossed the points. He whistled in the siding. He was still whistling as the last passenger left the station. Then two engineers climbed up and knocked Gordon's whistle valve shut. At last, the whistling stopped. Gordon puffed slowly to the sheds. That night, the other engines couldn't help but tease Gordon. "Really useful engines never whistle loudly," said Henry quietly. "Not on this railway." All the engines laughed, except Gordon. From then on, Gordon was a quieter, wiser engine. Well, for a few days anyway. Engine Adventures, Flynn. This story is about Flynn, Sodor's fastest fire engine. He can travel on a track or go by road. But one day, Flynn forgot how to use his road wheels. How would he race to the rescue now? Flynn was a fire engine with two sets of wheels. One set was for riding the rails, and the other was for rolling on the roads. One day, Victor was fixing Flynn's road wheels. "Ready!" smiled Victor. "Now you can rescue by road or by rail." But Flynn hadn't driven on roads for a long time. His wheels wobbled as he rumbled away. Before long, Flynn stopped at a quiet junction. He wanted to try his road wheels while no one was watching. He rolled slowly onto the road, but his wheels wobbled and shook. He didn't feel much like the famous fiery Flynn. Just then, Charlie chuffed by. "Ha ha ha! What's wrong?" he peeped. "You look like a big red wobble on wheels! Ha 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 ha!" Flynn didn't want to look silly, so he rolled back onto the rails where his wheels wouldn't shake. "The Sodor Search and Rescue Team need your help," said Charlie. "Hurry, hurry! If you can!" Rocky was glad when Flynn arrived at the Search and Rescue Center. "Emergency!" roared Rocky. "The Fat Controller's shed is on fire!" "Firefighter Flynn, ready, steady, and raring to go," Flynn called. The quickest way to reach the shed was by road, but Flynn was worried about his wobbly wheels. "I can get there faster than fast by rail," he promised Rocky. Riding the rails, Flynn felt fast and fearless. Then he saw Butch had broken down ahead. "Can you give me a tour, Flynn?" called Butch. Flynn wanted to help, but he knew that would mean using his wobbly road wheels. He didn't want to be called a big red wobble again. "Sorry, Butch," said Flynn. "I'm racing to an emergency." And he rattled away. There was more trouble at the level crossing. Bertie had stopped. His engine had overheated. "Please fetch some water to cool me down," beeped Bertie. Flynn wanted to help, but he would have to go on the road. He didn't want Bertie's passengers to call him a big red wobble. "Sorry," called Flynn. "The Fat Controller's shed is on fire." Flynn felt bad for not helping, but he didn't want his friends to see him wobble all over the roads. At last, he arrived at the burning shed. "This is an emergency," the Fat Controller said to Flynn crossly. Why have you come by rail?" Flynn didn't want to say that he was scared to go on the road. "I'm sorry, sir," he cried. "No excuses, Flynn," said the Fat Controller, "and no more delays." Flynn looked at the fire. Then he looked at all the people watching him. "They will call me a big red wobble," he worried. "I can't go on the road. I just can't do it! Flynn felt terrible. I'm not fiery, Flynn. I'm frightened, Flynn. I can't save the shed, and it's all my fault. Suddenly, a little boy shouted, Our firefighting hero is here! Hooray for Flynn! Everybody cheered. Flynn looked, and he listened. Then his wheels stopped wobbling. I am Fiery Flynn. I want to be a hero. I don't mind being called a big red wobble on wheels. I'm ready to rescue. Here I come! Flynn raced onto the road. His wheels wobbled, but Flynn didn't mind. He was Firefighter Flynn of the road and rail. Stand back for Flynn! The Fat Controller boomed. Water whooshed into the flames. They flickered and fizzled, and soon the fire was out. Now I must hurry. I have others to rescue, Flynn said bravely. First, Flynn fetched water to cool down Bertie's engine. Then he towed Butch safely home. Thomas and Charlie were waiting to greet Flynn. Your wheels aren't wobbling, Charlie said. You're not a big red wobble anymore. No, you're a big red hero, Thomas smiled. Flynn's wheels began to shake again, but this time it wasn't with worry. It was with joy. Engine Adventures, Emily. This story is about Emily, who came to join the steam team on Sodor. At first, some of the engines weren't very friendly to her. Emily wondered what she had done wrong. It was Emily's first day on the Fat Controller's railway. She was a beautiful engine, with dark green paint and shiny brass fittings. Meet Emily, the Fat Controller said to Thomas. Peep, peep, whistled Thomas, and Emily smiled. Are you ready to collect your coaches, Emily? Asked the Fat Controller. Yes, sir, said Emily. Emily steamed away, but the only coaches she could find were Annie and Clarabelle. Annie and Clarabelle were not happy. Thomas wouldn't like this, grumbled Clarabelle. Emily passed Edward and Percy further down the track. She whistled a friendly hello, but the engines both pulled angry faces. Just then, Thomas came puffing down the line. Peep, peep! Hello, Thomas! Emily called. But when Thomas saw that Emily was pulling his coaches, he looked cross too. Emily chuffed away, feeling sad. She didn't know why all the engines were being so rude to her. The Fat Controller came to meet Thomas at Maithwaite Station. I want you to collect some new coaches from the docks, he told Thomas. Off you go. New coaches, thought Thomas. Thomas's wheels wobbled with worry. He thought the new coaches were for him. He didn't want new coaches. He wanted to keep Annie and Clarabelle. Later that day, Oliver met Emily in the yard. What are you doing with Thomas's coaches? Oliver shouted. Emily felt terrible. No wonder Thomas was cross, she thought. I must take Annie and Clarabelle back to him right away. Emily set off, but soon had to stop again. Oliver had broken down on the track crossing. Suddenly, Emily heard a clickety-clack on the track ahead. It was Thomas, and he was steaming straight towards Oliver. Bust my buffers! Cried Emily. Thomas will never stop in time. She biffed Oliver, pushing him over the crossing, just before Thomas rocketed past. Emily had saved Thomas and Oliver. What a brave engine you are, Emily, the Fat Controller said proudly. So here is a special surprise. Your very own coaches. Thank you, sir, smiled Emily. I'm sorry I took Annie and Clarabelle, Thomas. And I'm sorry for being cross, said Thomas. Emily was happy. Now she had 2 new coaches and a new best friend. The next day, Emily's job was to take trucks of flour to the bakery. But the naughty trucks made Emily late. If you're late again, you will do the Black Log run instead of pulling the flour mill special, the Fat Controller boomed. Emily promised to be on time. She didn't want to do the scary Black Log run. She had heard that a monster lived in the lock. But the next day, the trucks were naughty again. They made Emily set off too soon, and half the trucks were left behind. The bakery manager was not happy when Emily only delivered half the flour. She raced back to collect the rest of the trucks. Biff! Emily shunted them hard, but the trucks had taken off their brakes and rolled into the duck pond. Splash! What a sticky mess! The next morning, the Fat Controller came to see Emily. You are to take over the Black Log run, he told her. Thomas gasped, and Emily frowned. What about the Black Log monster? She puffed sadly to the station, where lots of excited passengers were waiting. I must be brave, said Emily, and soon she was steaming up hills and through valleys. At last, Emily reached the Black Log. Her boiler bubbled as a strange shape splashed in the water. But it wasn't a monster. It was a family of friendly seals. Emily smiled a big smile. The next day, Thomas came to watch the seals too. Both engines agreed that the Black Log run wasn't scary after all. Things aren't always what they seem, said Thomas wisely. Engine Adventures, Cranky. This story is about Cranky the crane, who works at Sodor's docks. Cranky played tricks on the tank engines to get us into trouble. Then one day, Cranky needed our help. Thomas and Percy loved working at the docks. They liked the sea air and watching the big ships arrive. But one day, when they puffed into the docks, a new crane called Cranky towered above them. Cranky was very rude. Hurry up, you lazy little bugs, he called down to Thomas and Percy. Poor Percy and Thomas. They told the big engines what Cranky had said. Cranky is so high up, you must look just like little bugs to him, laughed Gordon. Thomas and Percy hoped Cranky would not be mean to them again. But the next day, Cranky played a naughty trick. He told Thomas to move the trucks to the wrong track. Then, when the Fat Controller arrived, Cranky told a lie. Thomas has shunted those trucks so I can't reach them, cried Cranky, and Percy won't do as he's told either. The Fat Controller was furious. He sent Thomas and Percy to the sheds in disgrace. That night, there was a big storm on Sodor. Thomas and Percy were shivering in the sheds. They were sad that the Fat Controller had believed Cranky's lies. Cranky is so mean. I don't want to work at the docks anyway, peeped Thomas. Neither do I, Percy agreed. Back at the docks, thunder crashed and rain fell all around. I'm stronger than any storm, creaked Cranky. James, Gordon and Duck thought that they were safe inside the sheds. But they were wrong. A huge steamer had broken loose and was heading straight for the docks. The steamer crashed into the sheds, knocking Cranky onto his side. The engines were trapped. They would all have to wait for the storm to clear before they could be rescued. The next morning, the Fat Controller came to inspect the damage. Thomas and Percy are on their way, he told Cranky. They'll help you up again in no time. Cranky felt silly. Please tell the engines I'm sorry for being mean, he replied. So it was you causing all the trouble, the Fat Controller boomed. I had better say sorry to my engines too. Thomas and Percy raced to the rescue. The drivers tied ropes to Cranky and attached them to the engines. With a great heave, Thomas and Percy pulled Cranky the right way up again. That's better, said Cranky, and he got straight to work. First, Cranky helped the steamer back into the sea. Then it was safe for him to pull the heavy rubble away from the sheds. James, Gordon and Duck were free at last. They blew their whistles happily. Peep, peep! Thank you, Cranky, Gordon smiled. Who would have thought I'd be rescued by a couple of little bugs? Cried Cranky. How rude, puffed Percy. He steamed angrily away, but his ropes were still tied to Cranky. Stop! Called Thomas, but it was too late. Cranky crashed to the floor again. Thump! And Thomas and Percy had to rescue Cranky for a second time. Now Cranky works well with Thomas and Percy. He still looks down on them from high in the sky, but he never calls them little bugs. Ever since the big storm, Cranky knows how really useful little engines can be. After all, Thomas and Percy did rescue him twice. Engine Adventures, Toby. This story is about Toby the tram engine. Toby felt sad because some people said he was too old-fashioned. Then one day, someone special came to his rescue. Toby was a tram engine with cowcatchers, side plates, and a coach called Henrietta. Toby always felt happy when he was busy working on his little line near a holiday town. Toby and Henrietta worked hard, taking trucks from the farms to the main line, but they didn't have many passengers. Henrietta wished she had more passengers. The buses are always full, even though they often have accidents, she grumbled. We never have accidents, but nobody wants to travel with us. Sometimes the people on the buses laughed at Toby and called him old-fashioned. This made Toby feel sad. One day, a car stopped nearby and two children jumped out. Wow! Look at this engine! Said the little boy. That's a tram engine, explained a stout gentleman. It's a special kind of steam train. Can we have a ride in it? Asked the little girl. Please! When everyone had climbed into Henrietta, the guard blew his whistle and Toby set off. Hip, hip, hooray! Henrietta cheered as they steamed away. Everyone enjoyed the ride. Thank you, Toby. We'll come back soon, they promised. Peep, peep, whistled Toby. We would like that. As the weeks passed, there were only a few trucks for Toby to pull, and there weren't any passengers. It's our last day, Toby, his driver said one morning. The manager says we must close tomorrow. At the end of the day, Toby puffed back to his shed. He didn't feel like a useful engine at all. But the next morning, Toby had a big surprise. His driver held up a letter. It was from the stout gentleman. That gentleman was the Fat Controller, said his driver told Toby. He needs an extra engine on his railway, and he wants it to be you! Toby beamed from buffer to buffer. What exciting news! Toby and Henrietta set off the same day, feeling very excited. The Fat Controller came to meet them at Tidmouth Sheds. I hope you'll work hard and be a useful engine, just like Thomas. The Fat Controller smiled. I will, sir, peeped Toby. Thomas showed Toby what to do, and they soon became good friends. It didn't take Toby long before he was a really useful engine. Next to Thomas's branch line was a little cottage. Mrs. Kindly lived there. She was poorly and had to stay in bed, but she loved to wave to the engines as they puffed past. They always whistled a friendly peep peep to cheer her up. One rainy day, Thomas was puffing down the track with Toby following behind. When they reached Mrs. Kindly's house, a big red cloth was waving from the window. Something's wrong, said Thomas. He steamed to a stop just before a bend in the track. Thomas's driver and fireman hurried towards the cottage, but when they reached the bend, they saw why Mrs. Kindly had tried to stop the train. A landslide, said the driver. Mrs. Kindly was trying to warn us. She had seen the blocked tunnel and waved her dressing gown out of the window like a danger flag. Clever Mrs. Kindly. The next day, Toby and Thomas brought a new dressing gown, grapes, and some coal to say thank you to Mrs. Kindly. Mrs. Kindly was delighted. Toby blew his whistle happily. Peep, peep! He was proud to be a tram engine in Sodor's steam team. Engine Adventures, the Ghost Engine. This is a story about Ari and Bert the Diesels. They loved playing tricks on steamies and getting us into trouble. But one Halloween night, the joke was on them. It was Halloween on Sodor. Lots of passengers were dressed up in funny costumes. Thomas and Emily were going on a night run. They had to collect trucks from the smelter's yard and deliver them to the harbour before sunrise. Percy was glad he hadn't been chosen for the job. Working at Halloween was much too scary. When Percy arrived home that evening, Thomas and Emily were just setting off on their night run. Be careful at the smelter's yard, puffed Percy. It's creepy there after dark. Thomas smiled. There's nothing to be afraid of. There's no such things as ghosts, Emily added, as they steamed away. Thomas and Emily raced across the island by the light of the moon. Peep, peep! It's very quiet tonight, said Thomas. And very dark, whispered Emily. As they reached the smelter's yard, Emily's wheels began to wobble with worry. Diesel's Ari and Bert were nowhere to be seen, so Thomas and Emily went to look in the shed. There's no need to worry, Thomas said kindly. But suddenly, there was a huge crash! Rattling rods! What was that? Cried Emily. It must have been the wind, Thomas replied. But Thomas felt worried too. Hiding in their shed, Ari and Bert smiled. Then, Bert bashed into an oil drum, sending it crashing onto the tracks. Smash! Thomas and Emily nearly jumped off the rails. Next, the two diesels began to wail like scary ghosts. Cinders and ashes! Thomas gasped. This place is haunted! Emily steamed ahead. She wanted to fetch the trucks and get out of the yard as quickly as possible. Emily spotted the trucks inside an empty shed, but a white sheet hanging from the ceiling caught on Emily's funnel and covered her. "Fizzling fireboxes!" cried Emily. "A ghost has got me!" All Thomas saw was a ghost engine coming towards him. He forgot about the trucks and whooshed away, with Emily the ghost chasing behind. Outside, Harry and Bert were waiting to tease Thomas and Emily for being scaredy engines. But when they saw Thomas being chased by the ghost engine, they were scared too. "Help!" cried Harry. "There really is a ghost!" Harry and Bert rolled away as fast as their wheels would carry them. Thomas and the Diesels raced to Titmuth's sheds, followed by the ghost engine. Thomas blew his whistle loudly as a warning. "Peep, peep! Help! There's a ghost engine after us!" he cried. The engines all gasped when they saw it coming. Just then, the corner of the sheet caught on a signal and Emily steamed out from underneath. "That's not a ghost, it's just Emily," Percy peeped. Thomas, Harry and Bert felt very silly. Emily was glad there was no ghost after all too. The Fat Controller was cross when he heard all about the trouble that the Diesels had caused. "You two will take the trucks to the harbour," he told Harry and Bert. He turned to Thomas and Emily. Now we know there are no ghosts, we can all go back to sleep." The little engines had never been happier to roll into the shed. Engine Adventures, The Last Train for Christmas. It was so snowy one Christmas Eve, we thought that Connor's train would have to be cancelled. He would need help from his friends to pull home the last train in time for Christmas. It was Christmas Eve on Sodor, and Thomas and Oliver were busy clearing snow from the tracks. "I'm glad we won't have to wear our snowplows tomorrow," said Thomas. "We'll be warm in our sheds instead." Oliver looked puzzled. "Tomorrow is Christmas Day. No trains will run all day," Thomas explained. "Hurrah!" Oliver cheered. Over on the mainland, Connor was collecting passengers for Sodor. But there were too many people, and Connor's coaches were soon full. As the guard waved his flag for Connor to go, there were still lots of people left on the platform. "Don't worry, I'll be back," Connor promised. "There is still one more train before Christmas." The Fat Controller met Connor at Knapford. "Sir, I need more coaches to make one last run to the mainland and back. I'll bring everyone home in time for Christmas," said Connor. "Quickly then, Connor. The snow is getting heavier," the Fat Controller replied. "Don't worry, sir. I'm a really fast engine," Connor smiled. Connor steamed to the yard for more coaches, but all he could see were 3 mounds of snow. Suddenly, Thomas appeared, and with a biff of his buffers, all the snow fell away. "Take these special slip coaches," Thomas said. "You can uncouple them without having to stop." "I'll be quicker than ever," Connor smiled, and he hurried away. Later, the Fat Controller had bad news. "Snow has blocked the main line," he said. "No more trains will run tonight." "But Connor and his passengers need to get home for Christmas, sir," said Thomas. "You're right," said the Fat Controller. "We must clear the tracks for Connor's last train." "We'll do it together," the engines agreed. Thomas and Percy got straight to work, clearing snow along the main line up to Wellsworth. Suddenly, Percy spotted something in the sky. "Look, Thomas," Percy said excitedly. "Do you think it's Father?" "It's Harold!" Thomas shouted. "He's searching for anyone stuck in the snow." "Oh," sighed Percy. Further down the line, the snow was very deep. Hero was the only engine big and strong enough to help. He cleared the track just in time for Connor's train to pass. "Peep, peep! Thank you!" Connor called. Hero looked up at the sky. "Is that Father? Oh no, it's Harold on his patrol." Connor released the first slick coach at Kelsthorpe Station. It rolled to a stop at the platform. Instead of waiting for the passengers to get off the train, Connor could set off straight away. "Peep, peep!" whistled James. "What clever coaches you have, Connor!" Connor whooshed on and released the second slick coach at Marin Station. Thomas had just finished clearing the line at Wellsworth when Connor raced through. Connor released the last slick coach, but this one rolled straight past the station. "Fizzling fireboxes! The passengers will be stuck in the snow!" cried Thomas. Thomas called Harold to help, and together they brought the coach back to the platform. "Well done, Connor!" cheered the Fat Controller as the big engine pulled into Knapford. "Thank you, sir," Connor smiled. "But I couldn't have made it without my friends." "That's right," said the Fat Controller. "You all helped bring the last passengers home in time for Christmas." "Peep, peep!" the engines whistled together. "Merry Christmas!" The engines were glad to puff back to their sheds after a very busy Christmas Eve. "Ugh, Merry Christmas, Harold," Thomas yawned as a shape flew high above them. But Harold was already fast asleep at the Search and Rescue Center. Someone else was flying through the starry sky that night.